There are certain things in small towns which are significant to the town as to what is important in the town historically for the town. And one of them, therefore, was the hazardous waste site, which later became the industrial site or Raynham Woods. So I'm going to work my way this show back into that presentation so that we'll sort of update as to how things happen in the town of Raynham. And when I say that, it means that this hazardous waste site, which the Commonwealth wanted as a hazardous waste site, fit the need of the Commonwealth of Mass. And for this reason, they attempted to, quite honestly, block the town of Raynham from blocking the hazardous waste site. So that, and by the way, it was always a terrible location for a hazardous waste site. So if you're familiar with the Raynham industrial area and where Walmart is, Johnson & Johnson, attorneys at law are there, and all sorts of transportation things are at that particular location. If you're aware of that, you might say, why in the world were they thinking of hazardous waste site? Well, I will tell you something about what surprised me, and one of the things that got me rather active in the town of Raynham over the years is the fact where I moved from what called in Massachusetts the North Shore part of it. I call it that anyway. And that is Woburn, Mass. Now, Woburn, Mass has Winchester, has Medford, Somerville, and all of these leading towards Burlington and towards Lowell, Mass, and Worcester, and all of these areas here are where, I'm going to say it, I have a tendency once in a while to be negative, to the part of Massachusetts that counted in Boston proper. Boston proper is, as we all know, the capital of the Commonwealth of Mass. But not only is it the capital of the Commonwealth of Mass, it is the core area of all that they think is important in the town of Raynham. So you'll see Faneuil Hall is there, Fenway Park is there, Boston Common, Boston Garden, all of these significant things, the Mass General Hospital, Leahy Clinic, all of these places that are central to making Massachusetts what's world-renowned is in that particular cubbyhole, that little area there, and therefore what counts? Well, I use the term the 128 belt, and those of you around here, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Circling the city of Boston is a road called Route 128 in our world. And as a result of that, that is where within that area, Somerville, Medford and all, that is where the money is in the Commonwealth of Mass. And when I say money, if you buy a house in Raynham, now listen, no disrespect now, we're the south part of the state. You can buy a house in Raynham for $350,000. I like to think a fairly nice house because I think that's the value of the house we sit in as this show goes on. And it's a fairly decent house. In around Boston proper, in around Boston itself, however, you can't get a house of that cut for under $500,000. And some of the houses, on an average, probably go $700,000, $800,000. And some of them, I've seen them advertised at $1.1 million, which says, and maybe someday it will have a garage. I mean, you say, wait a minute, $1.1 million and it doesn't have a garage? No, it doesn't have a garage. That's extra. So that's the kind of real estate value we have in the Commonwealth of Mass. Well, if that's the difference in the type of income level that occurs within the 128 belt, then of course you get an idea where people outside the 128 belt. Included in that, of course, is the outreach of 128 called 495. You're familiar with both those roads unless you're recently arriving And if you are, look them up. 495 is outside of 128. Now, when we get to that point then, Commonwealth of Mass didn't care that that was a great retail or industrial site to be held by the town of Raynham. They didn't care about that. They cared about the fact they needed a hazardous waste site, and so they attempted to pass legislation that would block a community from blocking the hazardous waste site. And that was basically, I'll say, one of three prime locations. I'll use it: Warren, Mass., Middleborough, Mass., and Raynham. They did try, and I said it in previous broadcasts, to put the hazardous waste site in the area of East Taunton. Because you see, here we go again. You're down outside the 128 belt. At that time, 495 did not connect to Taunton, Raynham, and in areas of Bridgewater and Brockton. And so therefore, this was outside, and this was easy pickings for a hazardous waste site, except town people in the town of Raynham didn't think it was particularly a nice site for the hazardous waste site. And the town of Raynham, and I will say at that time, interestingly enough, that would have been about 1980-81, and a young man named Alan Chalker was the representative at that time. Senator Parker had been the previous senator for many, many years. Teddy Alexo replaced him for a couple of terms, and then came on board a senator that has been there for over 20 years, and we hope will stay as long as he wants to stay, Senator Mark Pacheco. So there was the representative, which before Alan Chalker would have been Peter Y. Flynn and David Flynn, and so it circled the town of Raynham. I say that to you because I want you to understand, even though the southern part of Massachusetts wasn't considered that important to the town fathers or city fathers in Boston, they didn't care about us at all. I mentioned those names because those names I've mentioned, I won't go over them again right now, but I will as the show goes on. They were the top representatives, senator and reps in the Commonwealth of Mass. So wait a minute now. Even though you think you're coming into a little country town and you're going to push this hazardous waste site on us, you find out that, first of all, the citizens didn't want it. Thank you very much. No. But also, we had represented at that time the top officials at state senator and representative. We had as good as there was. So we had people on our team, if you will, who were aiding us at that time. And that was when, I'll call it the battle ensued. And as it ensued, the question was then, would it go to Warren? Would it go to Middleborough? Would it go to Raynham? And Raynham, unfortunately, was on the front burner because the owner of the property came from a little town called New York, New York. And what did they care about a town named Raynham? And so they were pushing to sell it to the Commonwealth, if you will, and to be used as a hazardous waste site. At that time, the town had a Joe McCusker was his name. There's a townie name now. Take that one down. And he was also the town moderator. But besides being the town moderator, Joe was a chemist of note. And he was working for a large industry, and he was an expert in chemistry. And he told the town fathers at that time that if you let that hazardous waste come there and you enclose it, this is the game, of course, it's enclosed in sort of a barrier of a sort. Keep the hazardous waste in sight. Joe McCusker said, that is not going to happen. Hazardous waste does not bend to the authority of a piece of plastic. It isn't going to include it. It's going to get its way out. And so the battle ensued, and it was testy at that time. And the citizen groups was probably, I think I said at the last show on this, that the number one thing besides having good representation, senator, representative, selectman, Board of Health and all, besides having those people, you also had a situation where you were being backed up by people who were officials in the Commonwealth of Mass, and they knew what they were doing, and everyone took this full-fledged on, that by the time the dust settled, Allied Store bent, called up the Jordan Marsh, which they owned Jordan Marsh, and that was called the Jordan Marsh site in the old days, and told them, forget about it, it isn't worth the bother. The public relation was going to be so to a retailer that they couldn't afford to have that happen. So they made the phone call to the town of Raynham. It was not a happy phone call, and they let the town of Raynham know they were not going to use this as a hazardous waste site. There is a term in real estate, those of you in real estate know it, and you that aren't in real estate don't need to know it. Why would you? It's called land banking. And land banking was what happened with over 600 acres of land in the core of the town of Raynham. And that became what was called the Jordan Marsh site. Originally, Mr. Mitten, who was the owner, was going to take that site and put either in a shopping or a mall, and it was going to be one of the core of the area. But further research proved that we were a blue-collar area. No disrespect to blue-collar, but we didn't have that kind of money to support that kind of enterprise. One of the stories is it ended up in a town called Braintree, the Braintree Mall. And so there it sat, empty land, for not a year or two or three or four. For over a quarter of a century, that piece of land sat there. And it was leveled, it was constructed, so something could be done with it. And one day, I'm walking into the Raynham Town Hall. It would have been the old Town Hall, which is now Police Fire. And there's a gentleman sitting there like, why am I here? And I said to him, why are you here? And he said, I want to put a business zone in that land bank place owned by the Jordan Marsh people. And I said, what's your name? And he told me it was Bart Perini. Old Bostonians, you know who I'm going to say now Perini is. The Perini was the family that owned the Boston Braves. And at that time, they were to move the Boston Braves to a town called Milwaukee, which wasn't exactly down the street from where they were. So, and I said to him, I said, well, you know it's a tough name in this area. He said, evidently it's a tough all the way around, because he said, my problem is that I've been trying to come along what is the redeveloped area of Route 495, and I haven't been able to get what I call an area where people are ready to cleanly place business in their particular area. And at that time, some of you may find a hard time to believe this if you don't come from around here and you're new to this area. 495 ended in Mansfield, Mass. So 495 went over around where Worcester was and around that area over to New Hampshire and all. And so it was nowhere near the town of Raynham. And getting together with that was a gentleman, a representative named Peter Y. Flynn. And Raynham was battling to get what they called it the missing link. And it had various nicknames, but what it meant was 495 did not connect from Mansfield to the town of Raynham and Bridgewater, city of Taunton. And so therefore it couldn't connect with a road called 24, or 25, which connected down to the Cape. So 495 did not connect, and therefore it was abandoned. And through the efforts of Peter Y. Flynn, which we'll go into another day, the missing link was connected between Mansfield and Raynham. And Raynham Bridgewater is where it connected, and then that connected to the road going to the Cape. And so that's the missing piece. Now you'd say, well, what's the big deal? It's the most important thing industrial-wise in the history of the town of Raynham. Bridgewater didn't really react too aggressively to get it a business zone. See, here's your problem now in small towns. Small towns, when the people move to small towns, they like to get the handle on the door, and they like to close the door, and then that's it. And they don't want anything else coming into their town. And so therefore, in coming into the towns of Bridgewater, Raynham, Taunton, the citizens didn't want it coming in. They didn't want 490. The citizen per se, 495, didn't care that much about it. But those who looked to future, to the industrial growth, realized that if you could get Mansfield to connect with those, I'm going to say those three communities now, Raynham, Bridgewater, and the city of Taunton, if you could get 495 to connect to that. But see, the two towns, two of the three, didn't want it connected at all. And as a result of that, they fought not the road, they fought the exits. And so in Taunton, and those of you familiar now with the city of Taunton, in Bay Street area, they worked the citizens. The old saying is, you've heard it before, not in my backyard. They didn't want an exit off of 495 to Bay Street, and they fought it. And then in Raynham, of course, being Raynham, we wanted it because we wanted to affect our industrial site, so we wanted it. And then down to Bridgewater, they really didn't want an exit onto their residential homes in that particular area. So two of the three communities fought it. I give you information which probably isn't, I always tell to the students, some of the stories I tell you are true, and some of the things I do tell you are true, and some of the things I tell you may be true and may not be true. But in this battle on Bay Street, there was a representative at that time which Tauntonians know. Those of you, by the way, in Raynham, a large number of the population comes from the city of Taunton. You will understand the name I'm going to give you the golden name for the 60s, 70s, 80s in the city of Taunton, and the name is, you're going to say it before I say it, aren't you? Alexo. Ted Alexo was the representative of the Commonwealth of Mass district in the city of Taunton. And Teddy Alexo wanted that exit in the Bay Street area. And as a result of that, he got that exit off of 495. Now, there's something else that happened, that it didn't connect further on down because of that. There was a price to pay for it. But Ted Alexo was the representative at that time of the city of Taunton. And so that wasn't his problem. And what happened on down was the problem of the people on down, and there wasn't that big a battle because the people weren't primed for the battle, which we go back and forth on this, and I tend to repeat myself. And so some of these stories will come out pretty much as the shows, these town talk go on, as the town talks go on. And as they do, we will introduce to you how these things occur in the Commonwealth of Mass. You see, what you'll find out in the Commonwealth of Mass, there are very few what they call accidents in the town of Raynham, in the city of Taunton, town of Bridgewater, 495 area, Route 128. There's very few accidents in those areas. Those things are pre-planned, and sometimes people are successful with the plan, and sometimes they're not. So the area of what we call Taunton's Industrial Park, which may be, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest on the East Coast in Massachusetts now, is the Taunton Industrial Park, which was brought in by the citizens of the town of Raynham. But my version of the story now says Ted Alexo was the rep at that time, later became Senator Alexo, representing Raynham also, by the way, and he was the one who got the exit onto that particular, where now is the industrial park, where you see it is now, and it's rather large is an understatement, of course. Well, continuing on down, you then come to the Raynham off of Route 44, and that's where 495 then will connect in that area. And that particular section, not necessarily the road per se, but the general area, that sprung the Raynham Industrial Park. And that's Bart Perini. The Perinis, for those of you that don't know it, if you're not townies, when I say townies, I mean Massachusetts. The Perinis were a very well-known family in the Commonwealth of Mass, and they were transportation experts, so they knew when to put certain things for it. Because the reason they pulled the Braves out, the Braves weren't making any money, and as a result of that, they just took them to Milwaukee. And now, of course, they've gone around. I think they're in Atlanta. I believe that's where they located. And so, but they move around to where the money is, where the traffic is. And so, when the Perini's family saw the Jordan Marsh site, they said to themselves, "This is an area that can be developed," and that's what they did. Bart Perini was, sure, I haven't seen him, and so I don't know. I'm hoping he's still with us. Bart Perini was a real nice guy, and he was a very alert contractor. And he was a Perini, which means he knew how to build, and he knew how to develop a given area. And what he did was, he said to me, "How do I get it here in the town of Raynham? Because I'm not doing too well on this." And I says, "Bart, let me explain this to you. In small towns, you have to get to the people. You have to talk to the neighbors. They may not even like you. But at least if you talk to them and you show them respect, you somewhat have broken down the area," which Ted Alexo, being an expert in the city of Taunton, knew how to do that in the city of Taunton. And so I will give you one name. I will say Ted Alexo was probably one of the prime reasons for the industrial development in the city of Taunton. And we're talking many millions of dollars in that industrial park, and to no cost to the city except maintenance of roads maybe and things of that nature. So when Bart Perini saw this, there was one guy, I'll go into that another year, who fought him tooth and nail, didn't want the, and he was good at what he did, so he gave a little show of strength. But nonetheless, Bart Perini won because he knew how to handle the neighborhood, and he worked around. As a matter of fact, there was a little controversy when a little retailer named Walmart decided to move to the town of Raynham. And that will be another day when we talk about, maybe others, depending on Margot. How am I doing on time?
7 minutes.
Oh, 7 minutes is plenty of time. We'll talk a little bit about it. You see, what happens in sites, they develop, as do towns and cities, the chemistry, the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle, which I've talked about before. And they will decide what will be the identity of those particular sites. FedEx is now in that particular area. And Johnson & Johnson is now in that area. And there was a time when they first started to put the industrial site in. I was invited by a member of, not Bart Perini, by this time Bart's on to other things. He was big time, you know. And there was a fellow that was the commercial guru took on the Raynham Industrial Park. And as a result of that, he called me and said, "I want you to get together with me." We went to a little restaurant called Benjamin's in those days. And we went up there with the people of Johnson & Johnson, and we had a little discussion. Interestingly enough, Johnson & Johnson, number one claim was, "Are you pro-education? We need an educated population to work at Johnson & Johnson." I said, "This is your lucky day," because Raynham is pro-education. That's what we are. And so you will find, and he would say then to me, "Well, I can tell you this. If the time comes when we see a weakness in that plan, and you're not pro-education, we can pull out in a day, because that's the kind of money we got. But if we come to that industrial park, we will have a very formidable location. We will pay you a lot of taxes, and we will assume you're going to be sending us an educated population," which, by the way, we're talking now, aren't we? into the 80s, the early 80s. And as a result of that, here we are, all these years later, 20, 40 years later, and Raynham still has the Johnson & Johnson. But one of the things that they got in the interim, which was a little bit of a problem, was that little retailer called Walmart, because suddenly the industrial site, which appeared to be all industrial, had a retail outlet, which was a little bit on the large side. And so there was a little bit of a wave in this perfect glass curtain, if you will, as to the business and the residential versus the commercial, and that can be rather tempting in the destruction of each guy if you don't get some sort of an agreement. And there was early on. So the question was, why was Walmart, which you see now it's also in the other section of the town of Raynham. So we have probably one of the few in the country that have two Walmarts, but we do. And the one that we have in the industrial park is was at that time rather large, and so there was a little bit of a concern about a retail in an area where there is industrial, which would be engineering and large corporations of that type, batteries and things of this nature. We have a diversified industrial park, probably second to none in the East Coast. And as a result of that, that brings in millions of dollars in taxes and basically is an outfit that pretty well services the general area of the eastern part of Massachusetts and the eastern part of the United States with its industrial park. It's very well founded. And there was a little this and that, there was a little disagreement, but that was what you do when you have a large corporation in your given area. You sit down with those officials, you get to talk to each other, and it mends itself back out over a period of time if you handle it correctly, and town of Raynham did handle it correctly. And so now, living hand in hand in a fashion, you may debate it, but is a retail outlet, which is Walmart, but then also is your Johnson & Johnson and your other, and your FedExes and your other business locations, which are located in that, I'll give it about 600 acres. At that time, they were going to, hazardous waste would have developed 260 or something, and then the rest would have been just a wasteland, as we know. So the crux of the story is, on this facet of the town talk, is that towns basically, and by the way, there are other towns that are whining now that they do not have enough business to pay for certain things, and so they want to cut back on things like education and things like, but they don't have the businesses in their location. There was a time when business peaked. It was a time to move, and to be fair to the town of Raynham, Raynham moved, and so they established themselves. And so here's the numbers. I'm going to give you numbers now. Don't take them down. You don't need them. The best type of small town, I'm going to use the number, 75-25. 75 residential, 25 business. Basically, if you do a study of the town of Raynham, you'll see that's pretty much where we are. And so when this thing occurred, we had to make a move, and we made the move. And it was successful, and businesses are implanted. Can they move? Sure. Will they move? Yeah, businesses move. But as the most part, we're pretty well set in that area and that industrial park, and it's because of the 75-25. The other thing we did was, which is a little on the controversial side for those of you liberals versus conservatives, was that we did go what's called classification, meaning that we charge business a small percentage more than residents. So not only do we have 25% of the town business, but they don't pay 25%. They pay quite a bit more than 25% because of the classification of the tax. So I've got a little too commercial for you, and this is supposed to be a nice night, and the sun's out and everything's fine, and you're going to have a nice quiet night, and all of a sudden McKinnon's talking business. This is, however, part of what makes the small towns what they are. Those small towns, Burlington, Mass., Wilmington, Mass., Raynham, Mass., these small towns around that are successful, they're not an accident. They happen by planning. And in the planning, it comes to pass that things come together. Now, will they stay together? Well, you don't see drive-in movies anymore, do you? So do times change? Yes, they do change. And in the next broadcast, I will give you a list of what is significant in the town of Raynham, including our athletic fields and things of this nature to make our town attractive. And we will go over and show you that these are the facets of the town that make the town a prosperous town. By the way, you have been fortunate enough to move not only to a town outside the 128 belt, where yes, there are houses for 300 and some thousand, but also you will find that these are houses which you can stay in, you can have your family, you can get a good education, and Raynham's a good town, not by accident, but by planning of, and I gave you some of the key names. Mark Pacheco, yes, one of the top people in the Commonwealth, in the history of the town of Massachusetts, one of the top people, Mark Pacheco. So and Teddy Alexa when he was here, Teddy moved out, but he was aggressive when he was here. We've got some pretty good names to come at you, and I know you can keep a secret. Keep those names to yourself and don't tell anybody else. Nobody's business but your own. Thank you very much for watching. I remain, what's his name?